Chapter 5 Fremont Lowell Center for Psychiatric Care was only a 30-minute drive from Servway's protective facility, a modernist brick colossus that made up for the regimentation of inpatients' windows on its left wing via an entryway made almost entirely of glass. As soon as Norman saw it, he remembered why the name had sounded familiar. It must have been 4 years ago now. An inmate from the Women's High Security Unit within Servway's system had befriended him for a good 7 months, meeting up every Thursday to chat before the therapy sessions and pharmacological treatments Servway's provided had been enough to get her stepped down to Fremont's evaluation center. Frances had been transitioned to Servway's secure unit as the perpetrator of violent stalking. It was obvious from speaking with her only a few minutes that she ought not to be forced back into the population of a general prison to fend for herself, but she'd probably never be able to leave the facilities provided by one psychiatric program or another. She'd seemed comfortable at Fremont, though. Norman had visited her once, after her transfer. They'd been preparing to transfer her again, from the evaluation unit to more permanent accommodations in Fremont's residential program, the same type of program Rene had been hoping to enter. The place felt nice. Norman remembered Frances's mental health had certainly stabilized. It was easy enough for him to find his way again to the help desk, but he knew enough about hospital protocols he was fairly certain Wade's optimism, when it came to assuming they'd let unrelated members of the public view a body, had been unfounded. He would have to be clever about this if he had any hope at all of actually viewing Rene's remains. "Hello," he donned an innocently bland expression. "I'm a visiting patients volunteer at the Servway's Centers for Psychiatric Development, and I was told a friend of mine was recently transferred here. Name? Rene Cartesius." The attendant searched through their computer files. "Oh, yeah, this might be a bit of a special case. Let me get you a conference room, and someone will be in to discuss things with you in a little bit, okay?" Norman nodded, playing along. He hoped that if they believed his bereavement sudden, they may be more likely to let him view the body, as a means of placating him, avoiding upset. They led him aside, careful not to seem too suspicious. The doctor chosen to perform the sensitive task of letting Norman know his friend was dead was about 30 years old and came in rubbing sanitizer over his hands. "Hey, thank you for waiting," he sat down. "I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but Rene actually passed away yesterday." Norman tried his best to emulate the descending weight of emotions that might come from having genuinely waited in concerned ignorance. The doctor nodded. "Yeah, it was very sudden." He'd only had time to read what had happened on a generalized memo he'd received 2 minutes before entering the conference room with Norman. We think he somehow managed to get a hold of an article of clothing he had with him and unfortunately used that to end his own life. Of course, we can't just have the patients walking around naked. He was showing significant improvements at his last facility, Servway's. Yes, that's right. And he had asked at a hearing just the day before to be allowed greater freedoms of movement, a privilege he showed every indication of being able to handle. Sometimes, especially with very intelligent patients, this sort of thing just happens, and, they're clever enough to know what the system's looking for, and when patients are determined to act a certain way, even trained professionals can't tell the difference between someone who's pretending to feel healthier and someone who is actually healthier. Odd how Wade had assumed the sudden transfer to Fremont Lowell had been in response to concerns Rene had taken a turn for the worse. If Norman's memory did serve him well, and policy did dictate transfer to lower security units took 2 weeks to finalize, that could account for why Wade had assumed an emergency. He was trying to think up some reason why they hadn't followed bureaucratic procedures, as was Norman. And now, here was this doctor saying there had been absolutely nothing out of the ordinary when it came to monitoring Rene's mental health. The transfer, in fact, signaled a routine step in the right direction. Was he trying to cover up the fact they had somehow mismanaged an emergency? Norman kept silent, his face stony, inscrutable. "Can I see the body?" His voice actually did break on this note. "Say goodbye." Yes, I can see if he's still on site. Usually we transfer patients post-mortem to a morgue." "Which morgue?" Sainsbury's?" The quickness of the question, in the midst of what ought to have been shocked sadness, took the doctor by surprise. Was Norman really that intent on making one final visit to his friend? Perhaps a slight hint of senility, the doctor worried. Well. It wasn't like talk therapy volunteers knew enough about the hospital's private system of morgues to be able to locate Sainsbury's based solely on the abbreviated name staff called it by. "But, as his death was recent, he may still be on site. I'll go check for you. Would you like that?" "Yes, please, thank you. I'll come with you." "Right." The doctor let Norman leave the room first, nodding as he passed, then took the lead to bring him back to an information desk further in the psychiatric facility's bowels, past the conference rooms for visitors. "Marnia? This gentleman was wondering if he can see the body of his friend, a Mr. Rene Cartesius. I told him the body may still be on site. Can you check?" The doctor turned back to Norman. "Okay, all good?" "Yes, thank you. Again, I'm so sorry to be the bearer of bad news. Please feel free to stay as long as you want. We've got a cafeteria on the 4th floor. Thank you, thank you." They shook hands, and the doctor departed. All right, you said Rene Cartesius, that's right. It looks like we don't have his body in our facility anymore. We usually transfer them to a larger morgue after it's been about a day. An old policeman's tactic came to mind. Can you find out where he went? Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Those records are confidential. Oh, okay. You can't tell me where my friend went? No, I'm sorry. I would get in contact with his family. I don't know his family. Well, there'll be an announcement in the local paper for his funeral, I'm sure. That should be able to tell you everything you need to know. She didn't seem overly guarded. If there was some discrepancy in Rene's sudden transfer to Fremont, it must not have been abnormal enough to arouse administrative concern. What a waste of a trip. All right, thank you. Norman tapped the desk with his knuckles in lieu of saying goodbye, then doubled back. Do you have a Frances Hayworth still staying at these facilities by any chance? She came about 4 years ago. I used to be her conversation partner for the visitor volunteer program. Might as well see if she was still around. Frances, The nurse noted Norman's visitor volunteer badge. The program's strict vetting process enabled him to freer access to knowledge about patients than would otherwise be given out to the public. She typed a moment. Yes, she's just at the monthly fair for visitors right now, actually. Would you like to go see her? Yes, please. The monthly fair for visitors had to be tightly controlled. Only a few patients were allowed to participate at a time. At Fremont, only one unit of the residential psychiatric ward was allowed to participate each month. They used a rotating schedule for who would get to enjoy the fair when. Seemed it was Frances's unit's turn. A similar games day was arranged once every 6 months at the high-security units to get patients interacting with others they might not ordinarily see, but for high-security patients, visitors weren't allowed to participate. Allowing family members to come take part and cheer on their children or spouses, Norman sensed, would add an entirely new dimension to the strain these fairs put on hospital staff. He was led back past a series of examination rooms for routine checkups for long-term inpatients, down past a laundry depository's hallway, and finally down steps to a more open, glass-enclosed atrium that led out to the back of the asylum's grounds. 3 white tents had been erected to house egg-walking contests, pottery events, and other activities in which family, along with inmates, could participate. Again, had Norman not sported his visitor volunteer badge, he would not have been allowed entry. As it was, he was one of the few people present unrelated by blood to any of the patients. A nurse led him over to a welcoming awning, where family signed in and called over a loudspeaker, "Frances Hayworth, you have a visitor. Please report to the welcoming tent." "She's got her sister with her as well." A sitting orderly looked up Frances on a chart with rows of highlighted names, demarcating who had shown up amongst those pre-registered. "Norman," he turned to find the pair of them. "Hey, I hope you don't mind me stopping by." "Of course not. What a lovely surprise." Frances's sister answered for her in a way the heady mix of antipsychotics Frances took disenabled. "What are you doing here?" She blinked. "I came by to see you." He didn't want to admit Rene's death had made him lonely. "Really?" "Yeah, I hope that's okay." "Of course. I'm Natalie, by the way." They shook hands. "Norman." "Oh, I remember a Norman. Frances told me about you." "I was just telling her." Frances's words always came slow and slurred, an effect exacerbated by medication. "How they need to start getting us more talk therapy here. I really liked that." "Well, would you like me to come visit you here more often? I can do that, you know." "They say I have to do a training course." "It's some sort of new protocol thing," Natalie explained. "Before she's allowed to talk to volunteers." "No, for my medication." "Oh, I see. They have a training program for the inmates for greater security." Natalie tried to explain, but honestly, Norman felt he could make better sense out of Frances's usual laconicism. "Do you think it's beneficial?" he asked, as vaguely as he could, unsure quite what they were talking about. "I haven't seen an increase in training." Frances shook her head. "Yeah, go figure," he grinned. He could at least tell. Whatever it was, Frances thought it was stupid. "We were just about to go do the coin toss. Do you want to come?" "Sure. How does a coin toss work?" "You just throw the coin." Frances hated it. "You're trying to aim into a little bucket," Natalie clarified. It felt nice to be back with Frances, see an old familiar face, meet new kindly people like Natalie. The coin toss was at the far end of the monthly fair's grass enclosure, a section of the ward's usual ambulatory grounds that abutted more confined, fenced-in dirt yards that could be used for exercise for inmates of the unit next door. These men would get to attend the fair next month when their turn came. Now they shuffled as per usual, backs bent to an extreme angle for several of them, moving in groups as orderlies shepherded them towards recreational therapy, which would today take the form of playing basketball. Norman flipped his coin and lost. "You get to try again if you want." Frances seemed to be flatlining from boredom. "All right." He got out another coin. No, you've got to use the coins from the game. Sorry." An orderly handed him a new one. "Okay." He got it into the bucket this time. "Hey, success." In the celebration of smiling, he happened to look up and over at some of the men from the neighboring unit who'd taken to watching the fair from the basketball court. Rene stood among them, watching him from the free-throw line. "Hang on 1 second, okay?" Norman excused himself. "Hey, Hey! He practically jogged to the fence, paining his old joints, to push a hand against its cool metal links. He'd been wrong. It was Rene, but he hadn't been watching the coin toss. He'd simply gazed in the fair's direction a moment, bored with free throws. Now he'd moved on to watching the intake tent. "Rene!" Norman shook the fence and beckoned. "Hey!" Rene pointed at himself questioningly. "Yeah, hey!" Rene didn't recognize him. Sometimes medications could produce a stupor. I have your ticket," Norman realized, fumbling. "What?" Rene drew closer. Interactions between units were not so rare that the orderlies overseeing basketball wouldn't allow them. From Norman's casual clothing, he could almost have been an inmate, though his shoes had soles that were too stiff to be allowed inpatients. The orderlies relaxed a tad from where they'd sat up, but still kept a keen lookout as Rene jogged over. "I've got your ticket." Norman batted round his jeans pockets frantically now, to hold it up, finally. He pressed it to the gap between the fence's linkages. "Remember?" Rene snatched it from him through the fence. "And ate it." "Hey, what the—" "Rookie, hey!" Norman's startled jump back alerted orderlies to the need to intervene. They rushed over. "Hey, Rook, don't do that, bud." Rene snatched his arm away from the orderlies. "All right, come on. Wait," Norman tried. "It's all right, sir. Just try not to antagonize." "I was told he was dead." But by now, the orderlies were too busy calming Rene down. Nah, it's all right. Come on, it's okay. Breathing exercises." They walked Rene back over towards the basketball court. "Hey, excuse me." They either didn't hear Norman calling after them or chose to ignore him, assuming he was some crazed heckler. What the hell? They weren't even supposed to give patients nicknames unless they asked for them. Since when had Rene wanted to be called Rookie? Norman wasn't going crazy. That was definitely Rene. Same moles. Francis came to join him. "You knew him?" "Yeah." "Yeah, he's different now, isn't he?" Yeah, they cloned him. They're always cloning people in that unit." "Oh." Francis suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. This had to be a new delusion. "They go in, they clone you. That's why he's unhappy. I can tell you more about it, but not here. They've got the birds here." Yeah, the pigeons. They're watching." Had bird drones suddenly become a common delusion? Rene had mentioned that delusion too. Maybe staff members had failed to vet a particular book that had managed to make its way into inmates' communal libraries at both Servways and Fremont, some new popular bestseller. The concept of surveillance pigeons almost irritated Norman. He was so flustered from seeing Rene alive and well. What on earth? That had definitely been Rene. He walked the same, loping. "Can you request me as a volunteer to talk to?" He returned his attention back to Francis. "I'm interested." "About the clones?" "Yeah." He'd conducted enough police interviews to know conspiracy theories, though poorly argued, could still contain clues as to the truth behind a mystery. "Yeah, I can request you." "You don't need some special training before you see visitors. That was just for the medication." "Yeah, that's just for medications." "Okay, good." He led her back over to the coin toss. Rene had returned to playing basketball. What the hell was that? Some breach in form? Had Norman done something wrong? He was sensitive enough to instinctively assume that could be it. Were they purposefully trying to limit his interactions with Rene? Perhaps he shouldn't have suggested Rene fail to mention his delusions regarding the locker room ticket. But claiming suicide, that was a bit harsh, no? It wasn't like bureaucracy needed to be deceitful, when it could so easily be purposefully obtuse instead. But they wouldn't make a mistake about a patient committing suicide, for Christ's sake. Perhaps he ought to report, or was this some sort of confidentiality problem? He allowed his attention to be steered back towards the coin toss once more. "So, you can come visit again?" Natalie hadn't noticed anything strange happen. She'd been too busy helping one of Francis's fellow patients. "I know she'd love that." "Oh, I'd love to." "Do you want to come Wednesday?" "Sure." Norman penciled it in. Once Francis needed a nap, he said goodbye and headed back to Fremont's central help desk. "Excuse me. There's a patient in the ward abutting the communal grounds being used as a fair right now, goes by the name of Rookie or Rook, and I think I used to volunteer with him as a visitor's volunteer at Servway's high-security mental health facilities. Is there any way you can tell me if his name is Rene Cartesius?" "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. If you don't already know, we can't give out that information." Norman's privileges as a visitor-volunteer only extended so far. "I just wanted to know if maybe he had a brother. It's just he's recently deceased. I only found out about it a day ago. Well, we would certainly tell a patient if his brother had passed away. Don't worry." She nodded, obviously wanting Norman to go away himself. It's official, until they closed the door to their conference room. Then Francis sat down, scooted forward. "So, you want to hear about the cloning?" "Yes, please." Norman had his pencil and paper out, ready and waiting. "All right, so what do you want to know?" I guess, what exactly is the process behind it? Do you know?" "Yeah, they clone people. They've got a special room for it, below the prison." "Which prison?" "This, the facilities. They talk about it like it's another unit. Oh, we're transferring you to another unit. We're going to take you to the unit now. We're going to the unit." Who talks about it?" "Just anybody. Orderlies, people in charge." Have you ever seen someone who seems like they might be in charge of it all? Someone you don't recognize from usual interactions? Yeah, oh yeah. They have celebrities in on this. Hugh Cosimer came by just the other day. Norman tried to tell himself the fact Cosimer actually was the last person he'd seen Rene alive with could just be a coincidence. The famous actor did a lot of volunteer work. Very likely, Cosimer was the only well-known name associated with the visitation program, so if Frances had wanted to make her delusions sound important, Cosimer's name might make an obvious choice to pick to associate with her fantasies. And what does he use the clones for? I don't know. Do you know what other people might use the clones for? He was trying to look for any sort of pattern within her delusion that might point to a truthful clue. I don't know, I never see them. She seemed to take offense at the question. Who do they clone? Would they clone you? Oh, yeah. Yeah, all sorts go down, and they come back up, as long as they're on the right side of the bars. Who have you seen go down? All sorts. What about the most recent person to be cloned? If she was picking up on some sort of discrepancy in how certain patients were treated, she may not be that far off. Perhaps Rene's uncle really was high enough in command he could whisk a nephew away under false claims of suicide to a more comfortable facility. That wouldn't do. The most recent? I don't know. They come at night so the rest of us can't see, once we're all locked in our rooms. So what do? They come when you're in the... Yeah, they take you out of your room. They unlock the door and take someone out. I can hear them at night. So the night staff are in on it. No, they bring in a special staff. How can you tell? I don't recognize the voices. And you're sure this isn't just auditory hallucinations? No. Mine talk to me. They don't shuffle like... Frances scrubbed her feet across the carpeted floor to demonstrate. So, they take the patients away in the middle of the night. Yeah. Do they ever put up a fight? No more than usual. What door did they go out of? Norman pointed to explain he meant the doors that lined opposing ends of the patient's hallway. That one. Frances pointed in the direction of the door that led out into the breakfast area Norman had walked through upon arrival. But that made no sense. Surely processing would take place near more secluded areas, like the dispensary. The only place patients could be headed, if they headed out towards the cafeteria, would be towards the main doors that led to Fremont's side exit, or towards the neighboring unit, where he'd seen Rene. If they were being transferred, though, wouldn't they first need to... You'd think a final meeting with a psychiatrist would be in order, but that would take the patient back the opposite way, towards the dispensary. I don't know, I only know what I've heard. It didn't seem to conform to normal protocol, at any rate. And they opened that door, he pointed. You're sure? Yeah, no, they go out to the cafeteria area. So maybe they're going to another hospital, out the side exit. I don't know. All right, that's interesting. Have you ever noticed if they tend to come at a particular time? Maybe there's a schedule? 4 a.m., yeah, wakes me up usually. Do you manage to go back to sleep afterwards? This question was simply genuine personal concern, but it could also indicate whether or not she'd been dreaming. Sometimes. And you're still taking that insomnia medication? Yeah, the Novarone, only now they've bumped me up to 25 milligrams. Did you tell anyone else about this? Perhaps the increased medication dosage could be to ensure Frances didn't hear too much. Might explain why she had a special training session in order to take medication. He'd never heard of that before. But tampering with medication, while endemic, surely, to a certain extent, was certainly worth investigating. Especially if bank accounts like Hugh Cosimer's were involved. Willing to pay out to ensure the comfort of whomever Hugh had come to visit. Rene, at least, was one of those lucky inmates. A friend? Willing to pay to ensure Rene lived in comfort, perhaps. Perhaps Rene's uncle truly was an influential man. No, of course not. I don't go talking to people nowadays, not after they started cloning. Not even your fellow patients? You don't tell... No, I never trusted those freaks anyway. Frances, a lot of these people are really sweet. Bunch of wankers. Oh, no. I get by with my sister to visit me, and you coming sometimes, thank you. My pleasure. Just do me a favor, yeah? Sign up to visit again, so they can't make me disappear, see? They'd know it was a pattern. They don't want you to find the patterns. You mean, if you disappear after talking to me, that means your disappearance is related to this conversation. Yeah, they don't want you to think like that. Will you sign up? Frances always had been shrewd when it came to self-preservation. Norman assured that he would. He left analyzing what precisely he had gained. News of nocturnal changes in patients' assigned rooms? That sounded relatively normal. If only he could find out if that really had been Rene he'd seen, and not some brother. Don't say clone, he told his worrying subconscious. Should he call Servways and tell them he feared a breach in confidentiality had occurred, giving away a patient's things when clerical errors mistakenly reported him dead? Or was it not a clerical error? How far would someone go to make sure another person was comfortable? It made no sense, though. Rene had had a fairly good chance of being transferred to a place like this through normal bureaucratic channels in 2 weeks' time, unless he'd totally blown the evaluation hearing at Collins, said something stupid. Now more than ever, Norman wanted the closure of being able to attend Rene's funeral. Why hadn't he been able to find a public announcement of his friend's death? By this point in his thoughts, he'd walked far enough from Francis's unit back towards his car that he found himself by the very fence through which he'd seen Rene 4 days before. He had an idea. He doubled back. "Left my planner," he smiled at the orderly guarding the entry to Francis's unit. It wasn't difficult to find Francis again. She was out in the common area, reading a romance novel before a process group session she would be forced to attend at 4:30. "Do you know anyone in that unit across the way?" he asked, inconspicuously. "The one that's behind the basketball courts, on the other side of the green outside." "You mean the cloning unit?" "Is that the cloning unit?" "Yes." Again, her delusion did parallel the particulars of irregularities Norman himself had noticed. He respectfully dipped his voice to a whisper, seeing as Francis had done the same. "I thought you said they cloned people underground." "No, that's just where they process you." "Oh, I see. Martha's over there. She's an orderly." "No, I was thinking more a patient's name. Would anyone here know anyone from that unit?" He knew some recreational events were designed to intermix units, so people could meet others they didn't normally get to see. He tried to be sensitive to the needs of Francis's delusion. "Do you trust anyone enough to ask?" Francis thought a moment. "Yeah. Egbert?" Egbert was a centennial who had been in the residential facilities since 2002. "Do you know anyone who's in that unit across the way by the basketball courts behind the green?" "Sure. Frank Manley, Robert Spencer." Norman couldn't be sure these names even mapped onto people who had ever truly existed in this reality, but it was worth a shot. If he asked to see Rene himself, he feared some internal bureaucratic note would pop up on the screen, discouraging the interaction. After all, from Norman's point of view, Rene was supposed to be dead. But they'd let him through when he'd known to ask for Francis's name. "Thank you, that's perfect," he returned to Francis. "I've signed up to see you 2 weeks from Thursday. Is that early enough, do you think?" "No, that's good. It'll give me 2 weeks. They have to keep me around." "Well, don't worry so much about that, please. You'll be fine. I won't let anything happen to you, okay? I promise. You can trust these people." "Don't trust these people." "I won't tell them anything, confidential, but they're good people. You don't need to worry, okay? I would let them in on what you know, okay? Tell them what you've been telling me. They can help figure out whether there's some alternative explanation." "You'll tell them." "No, I won't, okay? I promise." That could only make Francis more mistrusting. "But you have to promise me not to do anything rash, because I kept another patient's secrets for him, and it didn't help him get any better. Francis, do you promise me you'll at least try to broach the subject, even in just a roundabout way, with your psychiatrist?" She nodded. As Norman retraced his steps towards the neighboring unit by the basketball court, he began to wonder whether he really was well cut out for this job. He just seemed to make patients more nervous, playing into their darkest delusions. He only meant to carry on a conversation, usually. Look where that had gotten Rene. He had to remind himself this proclivity towards goading delusion could not have influenced Rene's decision to kill himself, not if Rene wasn't actually dead. But maybe this whole mystery was a simple reaction to the guilt he'd felt on finding out about Rene's suicide. Maybe grief was coloring Norman's judgment. Was he simply trying to exonerate himself? Now he feared he was egging Francis on in the wrong way, too. He cheered himself with promises if he could find some explanation for his own worries that Rene seemed to have magically doubled, he could share them with Francis to assure her cloning factions were not eliminating mental patients who knew too much. He decided to tell an orderly about her fears. He'd call up once he got home to ensure the tip-off remained anonymous. Chapter 7. Norman smiled as politely as he could to the orderly who found him at the door to Francis's cloning unit. "I'm here to see Frank." Norman held up his credentials. "I'm a volunteer for visiting and conversation." "Frank who?" "Oh, I can't remember." Just in case Egbert had remembered the wrong name. "They just told me the guy's name was Frank, something like Manley, maybe? Frank Manley?" "Yeah, we have a Frank Manley. You'll need to check in at the front desk." Norman had bet right. The front desk oversaw a communal waiting area, almost as wide as the unit's skyrise itself. He scanned the patients who milled past, trying to look absent-minded as he kept an eye out for Rene. A nurse was just finishing filling out forms. At length, she looked up. "Yes, how can I help you?" "I'm here to see a Frank Manley. I'm a visiting patients volunteer. Do you have an appointment?" "Yes, I should be scheduled for—" What time was it? 5:30. All right. "I'm not seeing you pulled up here on the schedule, actually." "Well, I got the call just about an hour ago." "All right, let me just go check real fast. Is this your first time visiting the rehabilitation unit?" Is that what this unit was? Curing substance abuse, then? Yes, I think so. Norman tried to act as he normally would when first visiting a patient. All right, I'll just need you to fill out some paperwork while I check with Frank that he actually did make a request. I'll be right back. You can sit anywhere you like. Norman took a clipboard and the registration forms she gave him and went to sit with his back to the entryway, giving himself a full view of as much of the communal rooms as possible. Rene, though, didn't seem to be out and about. The greater freedoms residential communities allowed did mean he could have gone back to his room to lie down in private. 5:30. From what Norman knew of the secure units and serveways, that was almost time for dinner. A bell rang. The patients began queuing at a kiosk built into the communal room's side wall. That would be evening medications, then. If Rene was in residence, he'd have to come out. He'd complained to Norman enough times about the orthinine they made him take before dinner. Sir, the nurse had returned. I'm sorry, but Frank didn't put in any request for a Norman. Sorry, what was it again? Cromel? Yes, I'm sorry. He hasn't put in a request for any visitors today. Oh, but I got the visitor's call. Norman clutched at his badge as though suddenly defensive, still scanning for Rene. I'm sorry, I don't know what could have happened. Well, can you check again? Maybe he remembered wrong. I'm sorry, sir, but it's just before our dinner time. We actually don't take visitors this late anyway. But you must. I drove all the way out here. Norman's pleas were beginning to attract attention from some inmates at the end of the medication line. They stared at him dolefully, no doubt not exactly enamored of the system that enabled doddery old men to remain their only point of contact with the outside world. I'm sorry, sir. If you'd like, I can schedule you into our listings, so patients can see your name when they want to meet someone new. But I drove all the way out. Still no Rene. Norman would stall for as long as he could. Yes, I know. I'm sorry, sir. I'm afraid, though, we're going to have to ask you to leave now. We're about to have dinner, and as you know, we keep a very tight ship when it comes to keeping the patients comfortable. But maybe could I just talk to Frank? I think... There. He stopped mid-sentence. He'd finally caught sight of Rene, craning over one of the patients stooped behind him in line to catch a glimpse of the dramatics Norman was causing. 2 orderlies had appeared to help escort Norman out. Oh, no. Now, please, I'm sorry, sir, but if you can keep your voice low and soothing, it really is for the best. I know we instruct you guys on a lot of protocols, but Norman wasn't listening. He'd zeroed in on Rene's face. There was no scar. He saw it plain as day. He didn't have a scar over his left eye, the scar from the fight that had landed him in the high-security unit at Serveways in the first place. Rene? Sorry, sir. I think I can see my friend, Rene. I'm sorry, sir. No one on this floor goes by that name. The orderlies were starting to think Norman may have escaped from the geriatric unit. But Rene's look-alike turned away. That was insane, an absolute double, save the scar. He even parted his hair the same way. Damn it all, that had to be. Rene Cartesian. Cartesian? No, I'm sorry, sir. The orderlies seized their chance at Norman's momentary uncertainty and steered him back out of the rehab unit. Now, are you sure you'll be all right finding your way home again? Oh, yes, it's fine. We're so sorry you had to come all this way for no reason. We'll look into the cause for the confusion, and we'll put you on our volunteer list, all right? It won't happen again. Yes, thank you. He shook them off and returned to the car park. Maybe he wouldn't report just yet that Francis was having delusions. The neighboring unit was cloning people. Not that he thought they were cloning people, of course. Just because he couldn't trust himself to remain sane-sounding, were he to broach the topic of clones with a psychiatrist. He could just see it now. He had a nervous little tick of a laugh that would belie all attempts to sound natural. Could that have been Rene's twin, or just an insane coincidence of a doppelganger? If a twin, surely at the mention of Cartesius they would have taken pity on an old pensioner's confusion, though Rene had always said he was a bastard, hadn't he? Suppose that man's last name differed from Rene's. Was it possible to retain such a strong resemblance between half-brothers? It was the only way Norman could explain the scar's disappearance. Maybe it would even explain why Rookie had eaten Rene's baggage claim ticket. Rene prized it as proof, a link to his uncle's love. Legitimate family could get jealous. That hardly made sense, but it had madness. Medications did strange things to patients' minds. What Norman needed to do now was have a look at census records, discover what family Rene might claim descent from, see if they had any record of a young man in that family around 24 years of age, as Rene had been. If somehow Norman had been mistaken about the scar, and the ticket, along with Rene's removal to Fremont, were part of some ploy to ensure he was more comfortable, some conspiracy to provide privileged treatment within statewide psychiatric facilities, the census could help Norman on that count as well. Who better to sound out for information than the uncle who had allegedly provided Rene with the very luggage ticket that had been the one tangible eccentricity to the case that clearly delineated an oddity worth investigating? Everything else Norman could fit into a convenient narrative of bureaucratic contrivance, or at best, negligence. The ticket, on the other hand. The only problem was that Rene's scar certainly had been real. You couldn't fake that, not with orderlies overseeing Rene's movements every day. If they were relocating him, that wasn't part of the ploy. Orderlies would rumple that sort of theatrics instantly. Besides, Norman himself had gotten a good look at that scar many a time. Perhaps at the rehab center he had simply overlooked it. But he could have sworn. Well, either way, if Norman could find the uncle who had sent Rene the ticket, he might be slightly closer to an explanation. Luckily, he had a clue. He was glad he'd written it down. Rene's aunt's husband's brother's brother. If Rene's mom slept with her sister's brother-in-law, and the allocation of an additional epithetic brother had been one of Rene's habitually absent-minded turns of phrase, Norman had simply defined Rene's mother from his birth certificate, defined Rene's mother's sister, defined who Rene's mother's sister had married, defined the names of this man's brothers. If Rene's mother had instead had relations with the brother-in-law of her sister's brother-in-law, and Rene had forgotten to add in an in-law, this could get fairly complex. But either way, the search would begin at the civil registration services he had often had to turn to during particularly difficult investigations as an inspector. He went to the Census Bureau. The Bureau listed Rene as having been predeceased by an Alfred and Laura Cartesius. A check in old marriage registries confirmed Laura Cartesius had once been Laura Fournier. Laura Fournier had had a sister named Dorothy. Dorothy Fournier had married Jebediah Monado. Jebediah Monado had a sister Norma and 2 brothers, Gottfried and Wilhelm. Damn, that meant 2 possible uncles. As far as potential lookalikes went, neither of these men ever had any children, but Dorothy had a son listed, born around the same year as Rene. That meant the existence of a man about 24 years old who looked like Rene was at least possible. The uncles could tell Norman. Their names, Gottfried and Wilhelm, were searchable online in recent census records. The database showed both Jebediah's brothers were living in the same town, Robin Crescent, about an hour and a half from where Norman himself lived. That wasn't too far. Norman decided that he would call on these gentlemen first, in hopes he wouldn't have to track down every single brother-in-law related to the Monado family as well, in an attempt to piece together who may have sent Rene that ticket. Chapter 8. Robin Crescent was a pleasant enough hillock of meandering streams for about 15 minutes past the first outcrop of incoming residential zoning. Then it merged into zigzagging bus lanes and department stores. Norman's Megane began to swelter under the strain of low air conditioner fluid. He had to pull into a neighborhood grocery to ask the way to 37 Crescent Avenue, bypassing the row of flowers by the door to place his grubbily penciled-in map before the attendant, and ask why none of the street names local zoning authorities had printed seemed to bear any resemblance to the streets he was finding. He'd already thought up a way to win each uncle over, in an attempt to sound them out, see who was likely to have sent Rene the ticket, if indeed either man had actually done so. He'd brought along with him the sweater and dog tags he'd taken from amongst Rene's personal effects. He'd offer the dog tags to the first uncle, the sweater to the second, as a show of amiability. He had a 50% chance of arriving at the house of Rene's kindly uncle first. Perhaps, if he approached as a friend, he could win this man's confidence. He got out at last by the house he sought at 37 Crescent Avenue, taking the dog tags with him to go knock on the door. A 75-year-old man answered, frail but alert. Yes, hello? Hello, are you Gottfried Monado? Yes. Gottfried had the slightest hint of an accent, a lilting, questioning clip to the end of certain phrases. My name's Norman Cromel. I'm with the Visiting Patients Volunteer Program at Survey's Protective Facility. I got to know your nephew there. Oh, yes. I heard about his passing, and I thought you might like some of his things. I brought... Norman handed over the dog tags. Oh, how lovely. Thank you. Yes, that's very kind. He always spoke well of you. He was a good friend. I've been feeling a bit lost, actually. It happened so suddenly. I guess I wanted to apologize. I should have seen the warning signs sooner. Ah, no. Gottfried seemed to realize he had been visited by a man who was, in fact, in need of therapeutic conversation, though his promises insinuated he was there to dole it out where needed. Why don't you come in? I can give you a pamphlet from the funeral. Oh, thank you. Yes, come on in. Thank you so much for bringing these. Gottfried pocketed the dog tags. Are you sure you'll be doing all right, without... I know he said you were getting up in years, and I understand you kept in pretty regular contact. Did Rene tell you that? Good. I'm glad he found it regular enough. I myself always thought I was a bit too lax in that department. Do you want some tea? Yes, please. Norman looked round. The townhouse itself, while cozy, was bare. a common introvert's settling into minimal photos but multiple keepsakes. An array of teapots dotted the ledge above the kitchen's oven. Yes, Rene was a good kid. Don't know what could have come over him with that fight. Well, he always said he was defending you that day, although I've been told he actually had 2 uncles. It could have... Ah, yes, that's right. My brother lives just down the road. But no one else really ever cared so much to visit Rene as you did. Oh, I wouldn't say that. Rene always had fantasies his family was out to get him, but he was a good lad. We tended to stay clear of him. If we were worried about him, he had a tendency to lash out, not understand. Norman had heard that story many times. He seemed so full of life, I can hardly believe it. That's fairly common, actually. An acceptance of coming death often allows patients to feel freer and happier than they have in months. You're a psychiatrist yourself, then? Both my brother and I, well, retired. It's been several years now, of course. That's interesting. You know, he always said you, or maybe your brother, were quite high up at Servways. That's right. I was head of the board of directors for quite some time, before I retired. And Wilhelm? Your brother is Wilhelm, isn't he? Was he ever associated with the psych wards? Yes, Rene told you that. Yes, that's right. He's retired now, too, of course. Thank you. Norman accepted his tea, watching. For being friendly, Gottfried certainly didn't give out a lot of information. It's a stupid question, but did you ever manage to get any special treatment for Rene? You know, I don't know, sneak him in some sweets or something silly? Oh, no. He seemed to hope. But that'd undermine the therapy. Oh, I see. Yes, that makes sense. Maybe the other brother had been the one to send the ticket then. And I suppose you were saying you've had the funeral service then. I wish you could have come. I couldn't find an obituary notice. I looked. Oh, that's a shame. Here, let me get you a copy of it. I have one somewhere. It'll say where he's interred. Gottfried went to where he'd filed Rene's obituary away in a side drawer of his desk in the living room that abutted the kitchen's pantry-like eating corner. Yes, here it is. Mailton Cemetery, just out of town. Do you know it? I'm sure I can find it, thank you. You just take the first left after Main Street, drive straight out. You can't miss it. Rene's in the family plot. The office can tell you where. Thank you. They sat a while in silence, while Norman read the paragraphs written in Rene's memory. They are funny things, aren't they? Dog tags. Gottfried had been studying Norman's gift. I suppose young people think it makes you look tough, but I've never seen one without a name chiseled into it. Yes, I thought that was strange, too. Norman grinned. Did you send him those? Oh, no. Did try to call sometimes, I suppose, at least before he went to the secure unit. Thought he could use a bit of a breather after that. It's so hard, isn't it? Honestly, Norman couldn't tell if this was the kindly Uncle Rene had mentioned or not. His words seemed loving enough. They certainly matched everything loving family members of other patients always said. A little bit too well if Norman was going to be suspicious about it. Too generalized, almost. There was no warmth to the way he said things, as though Rene, like his obituary, had been filed away. But perhaps that was simply how Gottfried dealt with grief. That was understandable. Still, by the end of the conversation, Norman somehow didn't quite trust Gottfried enough to ask, though he knew he needed to. I know Rene always claimed he was a bastard related to the family, not actually part of it. Is that true? If you can call such antiquated ideas truth. Gottfried batted the thought away, then rambled down the complexities of Rene's lineage. Did he have any half-siblings? No. A few cousins, certainly. As Gottfried was a psychiatrist, Norman didn't want to tell him he'd seen what appeared to be an exact duplicate of Rene, sans scar. That sounded mad, but he had to try. I saw a guy the other day who looked like him. It made me think. Norman tried to be extra careful to imply, by the ease with which he said this, that he had in no way mistaken the man for actually being Rene. That was sure to bring Gottfried's psychiatrics out. No brothers, I'm afraid, just Rene. So, there went Norman's theory the man he'd seen was just a step-sibling, a look-alike. Maybe, before he pried too much more, he should try meeting Rene's other uncle. See if he seemed a more likely contender for sending Rene that ticket, or helping him to a more comfortable ward. Something about Gottfried struck Norman as off. He thanked Gottfried and eventually left, taking out, once he got in the car, instructions on how to drive from Crescent Avenue to Lamhurst Drive, where Wilhelm lived, which the grocery store attendant had helpfully provided. Wilhelm wasn't home. Norman went to get a croque madame at a nearby cafe, then returned 2 hours later. Yes, what is it? What do you want? Wilhelm had even more of an accent than his brother. Are you Wilhelm Minato? Who are you? My name's Norman Cromel. I'm with the Visiting Patients Volunteer Organization at Servways Protective Facility. Oh? I knew your nephew, Rene. We were good friends. I'm just calling to say I'm so sorry about his passing. Wilhelm scowled questioningly up at him, peering into his eyes. And, Servways allowed me to take a few of his personal effects, and I got to thinking maybe you'd like one. I have a sweater that was always Rene's favorite. Wilhelm seemed disappointed. Don't have need for a sweater. Thank you, good day. He made to close the door. Will you be all right on your own now? Rene always said you two were quite close. He was worried about you getting around on your own. I've hired help. All right. Well, if you'd ever like to talk, the Visiting Volunteers program has a... No need, thank you. Not one of those pansy hippies, dwells on feelings. You want to go talk dope with crackhead murderers, you can talk to volunteers, not me. The door closed. Norman felt he must be losing his policeman's ability to conduct efficient investigations. He couldn't tell if Wilhelm's abrupt attitude had been simple contempt for his nephew, or orneriness from tired grief. But it seemed if Norman was going to ask one of the uncles about Rene's ticket, he had no choice but to go back to Gottfried. Regardless of how unsure he was accurately reading each uncle's reaction to their nephew's death. What a meddlesome bore I've become, he thought to himself as he drove back to Crescent Avenue. Well, it was fun to elicit a reaction out of people once more, to see some life brought back into the eyes of those he interrogated, as they sought to understand his purpose and guard their own. Gottfried, sorry to come again. I've been thinking it over, and I'd like to ask you a question I didn't feel comfortable asking before. Oh? Yes, do you mind if I come in again? Are you in the middle of something? It's important. No, of course, come on in. Thank you. It's about a ticket Rene claimed. Either you or Wilhelm sent him about a week ago now, I suppose. A luggage ticket for the West End train station in Glover. Gottfried's face remained blank, perhaps vaguely surprised. For locker 264. That seemed to get Gottfried's attention, though it could only have been the fact Norman managed to remember such a specific fact from his nephew's convoluted claims. Oh, yes, he had that delusion. Thing is, I've seen the ticket. After Rene's death, I found it in amongst his assets when I got the dog tags. Norman gestured to where Gottfried had left the dog tags by the teacups. Do you still have the ticket with you? No, I'm sorry, I lost it. But if the locker had personal effects in it, I don't think he had gotten round to claiming them last time we spoke. If that helps or is important, I can get some old contacts I know to open it for you just fine, but what I really wanted to know was the timestamp on the ticket corroborated Rene's claim that you or Wilhelm had given him the ticket after he had been admitted to Servways. But Servways records don't show anyone visiting him or giving him mail, or really any way he could have gotten his hands on that ticket. I'm sure you know they're not allowed out without special dispensation, and since it's high security. Maybe an orderly gave it to him, some kind of nasty prank. Yes, that's the thing, that's what I was thinking too. Norman needed to push Gottfried now, and, that could be very serious, you see, because, you can't just do that to a person and expect them to remain even-keeled, even perfectly healthy people. I know it meant a lot to Rene, and I'm worried that kind of tampering, that sort of thing, it could have led to Rene's suicide. I wanted to know what your thoughts were. Can we sue? There has to be some sort of recourse. Oh, no, not sue, surely. But you can understand how serious it is as a psychiatrist, right? To say, your uncle loves you enough he gave you this ticket, and to later, who knows, take it all back? It'd be so easy for him to find out it was a lie. Oh, no, Here, Gottfried decided. Listen, let me let you in on a little secret. I knew Rene was doing poorly, and I just wanted to cheer him up, so like an old retired fogey, I sent him the ticket. I was just trying to get him some money, spending money, just didn't want anyone to know about it. But he wouldn't have been able to get the money, they're not allowed out. Exceptions can be made, Gottfried pulled a face. So he had gone against protocol, despite staunchly defending it during Norman's last visit. Yeah, Gottfried nodded ruefully. Norman grinned. No, I like that. So why a train station, though? Oh, I didn't want the rest of the family to know. They would have stolen it from him. I thought you said they did care about him, in their own way. Oh, sure, yes, in their own way. But they're greedy, nasty little vipers, always grubbing. Claim I owe alimony or child support, God knows what. You wouldn't be able to find it again, would you, the ticket? It's not too much money, but it's a fair amount. I could use it. I live right nearby there. You want me to collect it for you, whatever's in the locker? I can bring it back by or drop you there. I've got friends on the police force. They can bypass all the red tape of proving it's your stuff in there or whatnot, if I put in a good word. Oh, no, that's okay. Wouldn't want you to go to any trouble. No trouble. No, it's fine. Gottfried nodded his peculiar, rueful, and alert jab of his jowls downward. Are you sure? Yes. Well, let me know if you do have difficulties. It'll be fine. Thank you. I know getting that ticket made Rene's day. He was telling me all about it. If there was one thing that did make him happy, I'm so glad. Norman hoped they parted friends.